All right, good evening. Welcome to Kelly Kryc, Maritime History and Active Citizenship, the Plight of the North Atlantic Right Whale. This is the fourth digital speaker series program that Old North has produced, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome all of you to this program tonight. My name is Erin Wetterbrook-Yuskaitis, and I'm the co-director of education for Old North, where I oversee programming, exhibitions, and creative visitor engagement. I don't really need to say this to all of you, but our world has changed significantly in the last few months, and it seems that each new day brings a new set of challenges. While so much feels out of our control, to me, it's helpful and productive to concentrate on the things that we can do and find areas where we do have power. Here at Old North, we're reimagining our programming for the rest of the year and connecting our monthly topics and content to reflect our passion for active citizenship. That is a word that you will hear me and my fellow co-director Catherine say all the time. Each program will offer action steps to help you become more involved with your community and beyond. But don't worry, it's not all work. We'll also bring the fun through conversations with fascinating experts like Kelly, new mini courses, videos, and more. So this month, we are focusing on ocean conservation, or as you'll hear from Kelly, protecting the blue planet. Our city and our region, as you know, have relied on the ocean for centuries, and that connection to the sea and sea life continues to this day. Old North itself has a very strong connection to the sea, which you can hear about next week in our webinar with TJ Todd. Now, last month, we explored the field of archaeology, and I asked our visitors and followers to consider that everything we leave behind tells a story to future archaeologists and historians. We talked about treating the earth kindly by employing those famous 4 habits: reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. The reason I bring that up is because that mindset should extend to the ocean as well. So sadly, what we leave behind doesn't just make it into landfills. It makes its way into the oceans, harming marine life. And as active citizens and stewards of our resources, we must challenge ourselves to be more involved in the conservation of the very thing we rely on in our region, the sea in all its mighty glory. On behalf of Old North, I want to thank all of you sincerely for your donations, large and small, as you registered for this program. This kind of work is possible by the generosity of our community and participants like you, so thank you. Also, I hope you will join us for more programs throughout the year. Our newsletter and social media channels will announce future events, opportunities, and resources, so be sure to follow us if you don't already. And if you're in the giving spirit tonight and would like to contribute to our emergency relief fund, please go to oldnorth.com/give, which will appear in the chat box momentarily. We just reopened to visitors again this week. Yay! But after 4 months of closure, like many businesses and museums, we still face significant loss of revenue. Your support is crucial, and I thank you again. Now, let's move on to some Zoom basics. I think many of you are familiar with Zoom because it seems that everything these days is on Zoom. Thankfully, this platform exists. I just want to remind you that tonight's lecture is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you afterwards. I'll be emailing it out. And just remember to keep yourselves muted, although I do have the power to mute all of you. And to make sure that we can hear Kelly clearly, we will keep everybody muted until the end during the Q&A. You have the ability to type in a question while it comes to you. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat. If you click on chat, a chat box will appear probably on the right side of your Zoom screen. And you can type a question in there at any time. I will be monitoring the questions. If there is something that Kelly needs to clarify immediately, I will interject and ask it in the middle of the lecture. Otherwise, we will wait until the end to ask questions, and I'll consolidate and go through them. But with a smaller group, we can also have you unmute yourself if you'd like to ask the question to Kelly directly. I think that covers it for Zoom basics. Now, let me introduce Kelly. Dr. Kelly Kryc is the Director of Conservation Policy and Leadership for the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at the New England Aquarium, focused on transforming science into action that protects the blue planet. Dr. Kryc is an energy and environment policy professional who formerly held positions with the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, the U.S. State Department, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the US Department of the Interior. Prior to working in the public sector, she spent a decade working for the nonprofit sector, advancing science priorities in the United States and abroad. Her doctoral and postdoctoral research focused on understanding extreme climate variability in Antarctica during the past 10,000 years. Dr. Kryc maintains an appointment as an adjunct faculty member of Georgetown University's Science and Public Interest program, where she taught Science and Society, Global Challenges, and Shaping National Science Policy. Please join me in welcoming Kelly Kryc.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you to the Old North Church. It's such a pleasure to be part of something that has such historic significance in Boston. And I just have to add that we at the New England Aquarium are also really delighted to finally be open to the public again. As of last week, our animals, we have 20,000 of them, are ready and willing to welcome you back. So I just want to say I've been at the aquarium for just over 2 years now. And so as I give this presentation, I am, pardon me, I'm literally standing on the shoulders of giants, of the researchers at the New England Aquarium and other research institutions across Massachusetts and across the country who have been doing the research on the North Atlantic right whale that I'm going to share with you. So I want to say that. I also want to say I'm a geologist by training, so working on marine biology is new to me, and every day it's exciting and it's fun to be able to learn new things. And so I'm excited to share my newfound passion for the North Atlantic right whale. I also just want to thank my fellow. I have a fellow working remotely with me, and he did a lot of the background research on some of the history that I'm going to present. So we're an intimate group, so I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to sharing all about the right whale. So I'm going to share my screen now, and you should see a presentation. So I'm going to do that, and of course it's going to be right on the wrong slide. So at this moment in time, do you just see one slide, a title slide? Okay. Great. As I thought about you all in the Old North Church, I wanted to make sure we tied kind of the work that New England Aquarium is doing into the historical context of why we care about the North Atlantic right whale and what its history was before we started doing scientific research on it. So I wanted to tie that back to a little bit more to Massachusetts directly. I have to move some photos around to see my slides myself. So I found this really great quote that said by Samuel Eliot Morison in 1921, he wrote the Maritime History of Massachusetts, saying, "Massachusetts went to sea, not of choice, but of necessity." And I feel like as somebody who recently moved to Massachusetts, that really embodies some of the culture of Massachusetts and how embedded the maritime history is and how embedded the ocean is into our way of life here in Massachusetts and also New England. And now I'm just trying to figure out how to move my slides. All right, here we go. All right, so as we think about the first inhabitants, the information I was able to find was that there was definitely use of the ocean from a subsistence point of view, but that wasn't necessarily common amongst all of the first inhabitants. The arrival of the pilgrims on the Mayflower in 1620 was, of course, historic for those of us who live here now, and there's even a record saying that there were North Atlantic right whales playfully riding the bow of the Mayflower as it approached Plymouth. That's how many there were at that time. Colonial industries in Massachusetts were focused on the ocean. There was the rich ground fishery of cod and haddock and redfish. And then I live in East Boston myself, so the shipbuilding is still a part of my neighborhood, but also of what was happening in Massachusetts. whaling is the key that we'll talk about, but maritime trade was also a really key industry for in colonial times. And as we shift to a modern focus, you can see the thread of all of those things in the types of things that Massachusetts focuses on today in our modern economy. The tourism industry focuses on beaches, the lighthouses that lit the way for all of those ships. Whale watching, so the new whaling, as we go out and see the amazing whales at Stellwagen Bank. And if you're fortunate enough, you can see a North Atlantic right whale right from the shore. Boating, so shipping turning into our ties to the sea through boating, and history and cultural institutions like Old North Church, like the New England Aquarium that are tied to the ocean. There's a rich commercial and recreational fishing industry here in Massachusetts. And because I'm an oceanographer, I know that higher learning and research, that some of the best oceanographic institutions are right here in Massachusetts. And the future for us may just be offshore wind, which is another maritime industry that we all can look forward to. But today's focus is on whaling and where we find ourselves with the North Atlantic right whale today. So if we go back in history, the Basques were in Spain they were whaling thousands of years ago. So not thousands of years, but up to 1,000 years ago. Excuse me. So, but by the time the Basques had come to North America, in the 1600s, we saw little evidence of whaling by First Nations, except for drift whales, which, while I couldn't find a definition of that, I think that might mean beached whales. So using the whale that had washed ashore after it had died. As I mentioned earlier, that there's an observation that North Atlantic right whales were playing off the bow of the Mayflower. And then early in the 1600s, shore-based whaling was established off of Nantucket, and it was one of the first industries that was established in Massachusetts. That industry grew to be one of the biggest industries in New England, as evidenced by what you can find on the New Bedford Whaling Museum's website, that the New Bedford fleet reached its peak in 1857, when 329 vessels valued at more than $12 million employed more than 10,000 men. And I want to focus here on this. This is a really dangerous line of work, and many thousands of men died in the pursuit of whaling. I also really want to give some honor to Lewis Temple, who was an African-American blacksmith based in New Bedford, who invented the toggle harpoon. And this was an invention that changed whaling because I'm not going to be able to do this effectively, but the toggle allowed the harpoon to actually catch in the whale's flesh instead of pulling out. And so the whaling industry became much more effective by this invention. But Lewis Temple was never able to patent that invention of his, and so never reaped the benefits of it. In 1850, because of profits from whale oil and baleen, New Bedford becomes the wealthiest city per capita in the entire country. Just 9 years later, petroleum was discovered in Pennsylvania, and that changed the trajectory of whaling in this country because, of course, petroleum replaced whale oil as a source of light and energy for the country. It took another 130 years, and I actually, while I knew this inherently, I'm always struck by the reminder that it was only 1986 that the International Whale Commission banned commercial whaling globally. So that's actually a really recent development. And I'm sure many of you, including me, lived in a time when commercial whaling was still happening globally. Now, I do want to say in 2015, Nature magazine published an assessment. It's been really hard to determine how many whales were taken during during the span of commercial whaling on the globe. And the scientists who published that paper estimated that between 1900 and 1999, 3 million whales were killed as part of the commercial whaling industry globally, with 276,000 of those animals coming from the North Atlantic. All right, so that's an awful lot of whales. In the 1700s and the 1800s, 300,000 whales were taken when those ships were powered by only sails. When we transitioned to diesel and started using exploding harpoons, that same number of whales was taken in the next 60 years, and then the same number in the next decade. So we got incredibly efficient at taking these animals. All right, so what did we use all these products for? And there were some I learned in looking into this, but I think we all knew about oil from whale blubber. And here's some images. And I should say, I did a really poor job of crediting the images. So if anybody has any questions where these came from, and I do need to go back and credit where all of these came from. So oil from whale blubber fueled lamps. Special candles, sperm oil was the best for the candles, soaps, paint, and varnish. Baleen, which is there's two different types of whales that have baleen and whales that have teeth. If you are baleen, it's kind of like fingernails. And so that's been referred to as the plastic of the 1800s. And if you've ever touched baleen, it has a little bit of that plastic feel. But it was used to make corsets and collar stays, buggy whips, toys, and typewriter springs. The teeth themselves from toothed whales were used to make chess pieces and piano keys, the handles of walking sticks, and scrimshaw, which is, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, is art done on the tooth itself. So if you think about ivory or walrus tusks or anything, this is very similar to that kind of product. All right, so now we come a little bit to the right whale, and I've put this in as the right whale to hunt, and this is an artist's depiction. The right whale was actually named because it was the right whale to hunt, and that was for a number of reasons. As I mentioned, it was hunted incessantly for nearly 1,000 years. It was originally hunted on the west coast of Europe where it was found. It's no longer found there anymore. But the reason the right whale is named the right whale is because it is slow. It's found very close to shore, as I mentioned, at different times of the year from Marblehead or from the Cape Cod. You can see right whales from the shore. They spend a lot of time at the surface. That's where they feed, so that's where they're found. Because of the large amount of blubber that they have, they float when they die, so they're easier to find later. And they have large amounts of blubber and baleen, the things that were profitable from the whale. Now, even though I mentioned that commercial whaling was banned globally in 1986, the right whale specifically was protected worldwide from hunting in the 1930s because its numbers had been so depleted by the whaling industry. And after the 1930s, the population status was completely unknown until the early 1980s, and people didn't think there were any whales left. But a group of scientists from the New England Aquarium was out on a research trip, and they discovered a pod, and that started a research program that's gone on for 40 years now at the New England Aquarium. I found this really cool map on the NOAA website, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I've highlighted because it's super tiny to see. So when I blew it up, I could see all of these things. But inside each of these different colors, there's tiny little letters. And I've circled these to show that these have the letter R written in them. Which, if you can see the legend, R means right whale. And so we can see that right whales in 1880, so this is pretty far into the time that right whales have been exploited commercially. But there was a small industry here off the coast of Africa. And then you're gonna see a map of right whale distribution, the North Atlantic right whale distribution later that basically tracks this. So up into Canada, down into Florida and Georgia. And interestingly, from here, it seems like they spent some time in the Gulf, which is not common. That's not a common habitat for them now. The dark spots mean where there are present fishing grounds as of 1880. And the light circles, so what you find in here is where they had abandoned the site because there were no more whales to be found. All right, so this is 1880, which brings us to more modern understanding of the North Atlantic right whale. And so this is a North Atlantic right whale breaching. This is the type of whale that breaches. They're one of the large whales. So if we look at kind of where the North Atlantic right whale fits in with other whales that you might be familiar with, they're pretty big. They're 45 to 60 feet. They not quite as big as the blue whale, the finback, similar in size to the sperm whale, which was another heavily whaled species. And I think the next one, they weigh about up to 70 tons. So they're pretty big. And let's see. Here's a little cartoon. So we can break down what makes the right whale special and unique. So they've got these large, wide flippers. Let me see right here. And you could see those, I think, pretty well here. They kind of are big paddles is what the scientists have described them to me as. And you can see them a little bit here. They have, their eyes are way down here. So this is their mouth and their eyes are here. They don't have throat grooves like you see in a humpback whale. Their blowhole, they have 2 of them, and I'm going to show you what their exhale looks like when they exhale. They're unique in that they don't have a dorsal fin. Some of them have white patches on their belly, and they've got a notch in their tail. But their most unique feature are these bumps, these callosities on their head that are kind of like calluses, but are actually kind of, they comprise a sea lice. So it's actually a living component of them, but they're really unique because this is how we tell individuals apart. So every right whale has a very special set of markings from these callosities, and that's how we know who every single individual is. All right, lots of people call the right whale. I think they, you know, even on a call I was on today, people think that this animal is funny looking, it's ugly, but this is a photograph by Brian Scarry that I just think shows how beautiful this animal is. And to be fair, this is a southern right whale. So they look very similar. They are a different species, but I wanted to show this just to show you how beautiful I think this animal is. And there's another shot by Brian Scarry that also shows just how beautiful and agile and flexible these animals are. So I wanted to at least give you that imagery so that you could think about these animals that way too. Okay, as I mentioned, they've got 2 blowholes, and when they exhale, they have a very characteristic V-shaped blow. And if you see this and you're out on the water and you see a V-shaped blow, you are getting to see one of the most endangered marine animals out there. So anyway, just wanted to flag that for you in case you are fortunate enough to see a right whale in the wild. Okay, so I showed you that map from 1880 that showed the distribution of the whaling efforts. And I said I was going to show another map of the right whale distribution currently. And so it's right along the eastern seaboard of North America, from Florida and Georgia, where this is a critical habitat because this is where all the baby calves are born. The mama whales travel all the way down to the southern United States to give birth. And then there's big feeding grounds up here in Massachusetts. I'll show some more images. And as of more recently, the whales have started to travel up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence since 2015. And that's important for a number of reasons that we'll get to. But if you can imagine a more industrialized, more urban coastline than the eastern seaboard of North America. This has impacted the ability of the North Atlantic right whale to survive and thrive in today's world and to and impacted its ability to recover from the impacts of whaling almost a century ago, from when protections were offered to the North Atlantic right whale. Okay, so here are the big discoveries I mentioned. In 1980, the New England Aquarium scientists discovered a pod of North Atlantic right whales in the Bay of Fundy, right here. And in 1984, so just 4 years later, they discovered the calving grounds of the North Atlantic right whale here in Georgia and Florida. And I just want to mention, as long as I'm here, because Georgia and Massachusetts are both on the same map here, that this is the state marine mammal for both of our states, is the North Atlantic right whale. So if you're from Massachusetts, this is your whale, and if you happen to be from Georgia, it's your whale too. I would say it's all of our whales. And then, as I mentioned, in 2013, 2015, the whales, and I'll just do a spoiler alert, due to climate change, have started to move their distribution north, which has caused some unexpected management issues as we try to prevent unnecessary deaths of these animals. Okay. All right. So. As we look at where the whales are, I think it's important to talk about what they eat. And for this huge, huge animal, you know, it was, what did I say, 45 to 60 feet and 70 tons. They eat one of the tiniest little bugs called a copepod. And they have to eat 2,200 to 5,500 pounds of food every day. Can you imagine? So anyway, as they, again, because they eat by filter feeding, they take in huge amounts of water, and then they force all that water out through their baleen, and that leaves them with the copepods that they are then that then sustains them. Okay, and so I just wanted to show this. This is just from 5 months of observations of right whales about so early last year to May 20th. So I mentioned that the right whales like Massachusetts, and for every single whale tail that you're seeing here is an observation of a right whale. It might not be, it's not a different individual, but somebody recorded that a right whale was in this, this area. And look how many there are right in Cape Cod Bay, even right outside of Boston. I want you to also pay attention to these lines. These are shipping lanes, all right? And that's going to be important. I'm going to focus a little bit on shipping coming up. But the whales have been moving. So as they've been chasing their food, which is highly dependent on the temperature of the water and the currents, the whales are showing a remarkable ability to follow their food. But the food is moving as water temperatures are changing. And that is putting these whales into different areas that they haven't been historically, and that puts them into harm's way in some cases, in many cases. Okay. Okay, I mentioned that these whales have special markings based on the callosities on their heads, and so you can see these calluses, and they're different. And like I said, it's like a fingerprint for the North Atlantic right whale. And so over the past 40 years, scientists at New England Aquarium have created a photo catalog, and we are able to identify if a photo is taken every single individual. So we know who they are. And the next slide shows you the family tree of one of these animals. And I really want to emphasize that these animals do have families. So this animal, her name is Wart, and you can see what an amazing family genealogy and family tree she has. So the pink whales, the pink ones, so the light colored ones here, pink, are females, and the blue whales here are males. Anything with a red dot on its tail is dead or presumed dead. So, so she's had some loss in her family. And then anything with an X, which is almost every single one of these whales, has either been involved in an entanglement or has been hit by a boat. And these are the two primary risks to these whales. And so I mentioned that the whales are, they live on an industrialized urban coast. They come into contact with humans, and all of the activities that we are undertaking in the ocean, and that presents a risk to the North Atlantic right whale. And for the same reason that they were hunted, they're slow, they're found at the surface. The things that made them easy to whale also puts them into harm's way when it comes to some of the activities that humans are undertaking in the ocean. All right. Anyway, Wart has had many babies, and that is a good thing, and she even has great grandbabies. While I'm here, you know, these whales have culture, they have language, they talk to each other. As a way to mitigate risk, moms actually whisper to their babies. So very small, very low frequency noise, things that are easily obscured by boat noise, by industrial activity. And it's really critical when baby whales are born that they stay close to their mother, because they're small enough that they could be at risk for predation, but soon they get big. But they also depend on their moms for food, just like we do when we're born.
Kelly.
Yeah.
What are the childbearing years of a whale? Because it seems like the span for wart is pretty wide. And so I'm wondering if you put that in context of a whale's lifespan as well.
Yeah, North Atlantic right whales typically kind of reach sexual maturity around 10 years of age. If they are healthy, they have babies about every 3 years. But that has changed. The research that scientists at New England Aquarium and others are doing are showing high stress levels in these animals, and that's extending the time period between which they have babies to kind of on the order of 7 years and older. So it's becoming harder to replenish the numbers of right whales. And then they are now, right whales don't die of old age because they are dying either because they've been hit by a vessel or they're entangled in fishing gear. And so right whales are not being offered the opportunity to live a full life. We'll get into some of that, but that affects their ability to have as many children as well. Does that answer the question? I want to make sure that whoever asked it got it. Okay. All right. So here's what we're looking at. So management of right whales, we saw pretty good growth here from 1990 all the way up to about 10, 15 years ago, where we reached a peak here in kind of the 450 range. And then catastrophically, the numbers of right whales started to decline. And this is a 2017 number where the number was estimated at 411 individuals left on Earth. That number is now down to 400 and going down every year. We've already had one confirmed death just last month in New Jersey. You might have seen the news. And then there's another presumed death that happened to a very newborn calf. And both of those were due to vessel strikes. Okay, so as we're looking at this going down, I also want to emphasize that while there's 400 individuals, there's only 100 reproductive females. So only a quarter of this population is capable of sustaining the population going forward. So that's an important number to keep in mind. Okay, I've already mentioned a number of the threats, but we're going to get into a little more detail here, and I'm just going to do a quick time check. The threats to these animals are they get hit by vessels, by boat traffic, and I want to be really clear when I say vessel strikes. The two animals that were and they were both calves this year that were hit by vessels. These were not big. These were not big ships. They were likely 25 feet fast-moving recreational boats. All right, so it doesn't take a lot sometimes to kill one of these animals. Entanglements in fixed fishing gear. We'll get to that, and then climate change is kind of overlaying all of this because it's moving. It's changing where the whales are. All right, so here's a picture of a beautiful right whale tail and a big vessel, even though I just said that the risk of right whales, they absolutely can be mortally, they can absolutely die at the hands of a big ship, but also equally at the hands of some of the small recreational vessels that are moving pretty quickly. So again, if we think about the right whale, it's slow. It spends a lot of time at the surface. The types of things that make it a right whale are the things that are putting it at risk currently. All right, here's one of my few gruesome pictures. Sorry for this. This is what it looks like for a whale that's been hit by a propeller. All right, you can see the damage. This whale survived. Many do not. But you can imagine the amount of stress and pain that this animal has to sustain because of this. All right, so why are the right whales so prone to ship strikes? Here's a map of ship traffic. Remember where I showed you that the right whales live? Right along here, this highly industrialized coast of North America. All right, so some of the most ship traffic in the world is happening in this area of the ocean. That just puts these whales in the direct pathway of a lot of ocean industrial activity. If we break that down, just looking at some of the ship traffic along our coast, so not so much globally, and we look at where the ship strikes happen between 1971 and 2004, you can see that there's a high correlation between where the whales are and where the ships are. Okay, so what do you do about this? And this gets into, I'm not going to dive deep into all of the policy and advocacy work, but this is about some changing of behaviors. We know what the problem is. So we have determined, scientists have determined, that ships moving at 10 knots or less will not necessarily kill a full-grown North Atlantic right whale. Moving shipping lanes is also a way to keep the ships out of the pathways where the highest concentrations of whales are. So this did actually happen starting in 1997 when scientists at the New England Aquarium started a dialogue with the shipping industry, the federal governments of the United States and Canada, in an effort to protect North Atlantic right whales from ship strikes. And again, the two ways to reduce risk here is to change the route or change the speed or both. And so what actually happened in the Bay of Fundy is that the shipping lane was shifted by only 4 nautical miles. So this is the original and this is the new. So it wasn't a big expense to the shipping industry to shift, but you can see that by moving the shipping lane in 2003, which did happen, it reduced the risk of ship strikes to vessel strikes to North Atlantic right whales by 80%. And there was a decline in the number of ship strikes that happened to this species in that time. Right here in Massachusetts, in December of 2008, speed restrictions of 10 knots or less for vessels 65 feet or greater weren't instituted. But like I said, the animals, many of the ship strikes and the vessel strikes, I'm sorry, I'm still learning new terminology myself. Many of the vessel strikes happen for vessels that are 65 feet or less. So while there are protections in place, they're often not mandatory. They're often seasonal, and they are only for vessels of a larger size. All right, let's talk about the entanglement issue. This is the other one, and I think that when I first thought that whales were getting entangled, that they were in fishing nets and they drowned. And that's not necessarily what happens with the North Atlantic right whale. You can see this aerial photo showing that this whale has become entangled in fishing line and is probably dragging hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of fishing gear with it as it swims through the ocean. And it can do that for thousands of miles. Okay, so we've got this great video, and I'm gonna do a quick switch while we do this to share a different piece of my screen. And we're gonna watch a video that shows you what happens when a right whale encounters a fixed line fishing gear in the water. So the natural tendency of this whale when it encounters a fishing line is to roll. And in doing so, it ends up wrapping the rope around it. And here you can see that it's dragging a buoy at the top and the gear at the bottom, okay? And so 90% of whales, of the North Atlantic right whale, this just shows the whale swimming. You won't miss anything when we switch this off. 90% of North Atlantic right whales show evidence of being entangled in fishing gear at least once in their life. So this is something common that's happening to them. They do become disentangled, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes they die. And when these whales, when they have that much gear attached to them, they do not float. And so it's harder to determine that we have lost these whales because they might not come ashore in the same way that a whale that's been hit by a vessel has done. Okay, so it's illegal to kill a North Atlantic right whale accidentally anyway, because it's listed as an endangered species. So when a certain number of right whales die annually, and that number is less than 1 under Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, there has to be a federal process to manage this, to manage the fishing process to prevent what's called a take of a whale. All right, so the Atlantic large whale take reduction team has been meeting for 23 years and hasn't come up with a way to reduce risk to the North Atlantic right whale, despite it being legally mandated. So the goal is to have fishermen, researchers, NGOs, which stands for non-governmental organizations, so nonprofit organizations, and the government are meant to come together and find ways to reduce entanglement risk. And we thought we had a breakthrough at a meeting in April 2019, so just a year ago, where we reached near-time consensus to reduce the amount of risk to right whales from fishing. And the way to do that, quite frankly, is to reduce the number of, the amount of vertical fishing line in the water. Now, there's lots of ways you can do that, and I won't go into all the solutions because there's an inherent tension between right whale, the right whale conservation, and also a really key industry in New England, which is the lobster and crab fishery. Okay, and so the take reduction team is meant to come up with a solution that allows both of those things to coexist. And so I'm not going to go into the details unless you guys want to get into the questions later. But one of the things, and this is a technological development, it does not yet exist for fishermen, it is in the development phase, is the ability to fish using ropeless technology. Which is basically you would have a trap on the water, and using a radio frequency ID, you can release the trap and it would release a buoy and it would float to the surface. Now, conceptually, this is great. In practice, there are some challenges with it. So I'm happy to address as many questions as I can about it. But it could be expensive to transition. And, but it does have, this type of technology represents zero risk to right whales. All right, so how do we get to a place where we could potentially have both a fishery and North Atlantic right whales in the future? All right, lots of people look to disentanglement. We could go out there and we could cut the whale free. These are really big whales, and there are, in fact, teams of people who go out, but it is so dangerous. And last year, a Canadian gentleman lost his life because you have to get really close to the whale to cut them free, and it doesn't always work. Okay, and so I don't want to leave you all thinking that this is the pathway forward to disentangle the whales. The pathway forward is to prevent them from becoming entangled in the first place. All right, I'm just going to mention climate change really, really quickly. This is we've got really. The Gulf of Maine is one of the bodies of water in the world that is warming faster than almost everywhere else. And And as I mentioned before, this has huge implications, not just for the North Atlantic right whale, but for all of our fisheries, for those of us who live in Boston, for sea level rise, for all of the things that come with climate change. But as temperatures have been rising, the food, the copepods that the North Atlantic right whale eats, that distribution has been changing. And where we used to find North Atlantic right whales here, they're now up here. And the Canadian government wasn't necessarily, or the Canadian fishery wasn't expecting them to be there. So there was a season in which we lost 12 animals due to entanglement and ship strikes not too long ago. So it's both so the whales are at risk in both Canada and the United States. All right, so this just summarizes that based on climate change, what we're seeing is increasing. And I'm sorry, I forgot to change that. I didn't think you could see green as well as yellow. So yellow means increasing. This is where we're seeing increasing numbers of right whales and south of Massachusetts here. And this is where they used to be, but are now decreasing. And then always nice to put a mama and a baby calf because they're super cute and they're super playful when they're young. All right, I went over some of the policy and advocacy, and I just want to make one note, which is that it was a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is a big global conservation organization, they maintain a red list of endangered species, and they uplisted the North Atlantic right whale to critically endangered. It's the only large whale that is listed as critically endangered on the entire red list, and there are 33,000 animals listed on the red list, not necessarily critically endangered, but listed. So it's a really big deal and a really big red flag that an animal that we have the ability to prevent from going extinct has just changed status. So, you know, at this time, as I mentioned, there are two primary things that are preventing this species from thriving. That is vessel strikes, and that is entanglement and fishing gear. Since those are both human-caused problems, that means that there are human solutions to the problem. And so, if this is something that you care about, I encourage you to reach out to your decision makers in Washington and tell them that you care about conservation of the North Atlantic right whale. It is our state marine mammal. And the New England Aquarium, pay attention to, you can follow us. We will be providing opportunities for the citizens of Massachusetts and beyond to engage with your decision makers, to sign petitions, to write letters, just letting our elected officials know that this animal is important to us and that we want to see it. Not just for ourselves, but for future generations. This animal has a remarkable capacity to survive, and we owe it to ourselves to give it that chance. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to questions, and hopefully, I did all right on timing. And let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we can go back to any slides that anybody wants me to.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
I know I have a number of questions, but I'm going to withhold them unless people are slow to type in their questions. Another possibility, if you would like to ask the question verbally instead of typing it in, is to just type in the chat that you want to ask, or like, I have a question, and that way I can't see everybody at the same time. So just type it into the chat and we will call on you. So actually I do have a question, which I'll just get us started. Is there a different like policy and advocacy approach for every species, or is it done by group? So, you know, it seems like a lot of your work is around the North Atlantic right whale, but with so many endangered species, how is that handled in terms of policy and advocacy?
That's a good question. And at the federal level, the laws are the same. So they all get managed the same way. And there are a number of species of marine mammal species and whales, in fact, that have been listed as endangered and have come off the list. The minke whale recovered globally. Humpback whales have recovered, not in all places. The California gray whale is another success story. And so there are animals that started to recover after whaling. The North Atlantic right whale was just not one of them. And so because of the science that the New England Aquarium does, we have focused on the conservation of this species. But there's a very small, in fact, the world's smallest porpoise is named the vaquita, and it lives in the Gulf of California. And it's estimated that I think there's less than 10 individuals left. So there are, and it's a very small animal, so it's not the same as a large whale. But it is a marine mammal that we are likely to lose in our lifetimes. And so that has a totally different management strategy, and different, the things that are causing stress and the extinction of that animal are different from the things that are causing the North Atlantic right whale from their numbers from recovering. So it is species dependent.
Okay, a number of questions have come in. I'm going to go through them, and we also have somebody who is going to ask a question verbally. I have a couple that are quick, so we'll go through those. Someone wrote in, given that it's Shark Week, are right whales hunted by sharks, especially with the increase in great white sightings in Massachusetts?
You know what? I didn't know it was Shark Week. Good to know. And I noticed Nancy here has some whale sharks in her backdrop, and those are beautiful. Okay, so this is a better question for the scientists, but there are, for the most part, sharks are not predators of the North Atlantic right whale, except for newborn calves. So there have been examples of if a calf gets separated from its mom in its very early stages, it is small enough to experience predation from sharks.
Thank you. And are there any other species besides North Atlantic and Southern right whales?
Yes, there's one more species called the North Pacific right whale, and they're all very similar. But because of their geographic distribution and their genetics, they are considered 3 different species.
And now we're going to go to Chris, who has a question. He's going to ask it directly.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. Thank you so much for putting this together. My question is more around the whale watching industry. I know the aquarium runs whale watches, but there are a lot of other organizations that have whale watches. Is that a concern for the folks that are trying to, conserve, the population, or is it a positive or is it a negative? What's the view? And I know it's a hard question to answer because you guys do run them, but as you get so many boats around the whales, that could be certainly dangerous.
Chris, I have had the same question myself, and I think so. It's a delicate balance in inspiring people to get excited about ocean animals, and whale watching gives people the ability to see these amazing animals. I want to be very clear that because the North Atlantic right whale is endangered, that whale watching boats, and any boat, in fact, are not allowed to approach a North Atlantic right whale or get within 500 feet of it. So you might be able to see it in the distance, and unless you run over it, you need to stay away from it. So most of our whale watches, when I went out, we go to Stellwagen Bank, and you see humpbacks and some fin whales, and occasionally. And this is where me being a geologist is totally is a little bit where I'm limited. I can't name all of the whales, but further out beyond where our whale watches go, but some of the work that we do in our Marine National Monument offshore, we've seen blue whales, we've seen sei whales, we see the deep diving beaked whales, and we've seen sperm whales and thousands of dolphins. Anyway, I think that we have to balance that. If you see a humpback whale, and that inspires you to say, I want whales on this planet, then that's the conversation to have. Is it worth it? But we also know that noise impedes these animals' abilities to communicate. It causes stress, and there's a lot of noise that comes from the cavitation. It's called cavitation of propellers as they go through the water. And I've seen a lot of, when I was doing oceanographic research, I was always amazed at how the humpback whales would approach the boat and look at us and make a connection. And it was amazing to me. And I was on a drill ship, on a scientific drill ship. And while we were actively drilling, the humpbacks would come around the ship and they would seem more curious about the noise than bothered by the noise. But I don't know, I'm not a whale. I'm also not a whale scientist, but I was really surprised at their willingness to approach us and take a look at what was going on, because we were in Antarctica, and I think it was an unusual thing.
Kelly, we have a question from Beth. Do states have different regulations, or is the policy national or international?
It depends on the policy. So obviously, the North Atlantic right whale has federal protection. So depending on the whales, internationally, commercial whaling is prohibited globally, although there are some countries that no longer subscribe to that. And so that's not uniform, but for the most part, most countries no longer pursue commercial whaling in international waters. At the federal level, any animal that is protected by Marine Mammal Protection Act or the Endangered Species Act has the same protections no matter where it is. And then as we move into state waters, which for the eastern seaboard is all kind of 0 to 3 nautical miles, different states can have different rules. So that would affect ship speeds, and anything that was determined in terms of what the rules are for state waters. So lots of ways to protect these animals. And that goes for fishing too.
So if you can walk us through pretty quickly, what is the process if there has been a vessel strike? Is it the responsibility of the vessel or the captain of the vessel to call it in? Are there cases where the whale is found injured or dead many weeks later? What is supposed to be the process for when a vessel strike takes place?
You might not actually know that you've done it. So depending on the size of the ship or how fast it's moving, I mean, if you've been on a fast moving speedboat, sometimes you hit the water pretty hard and it feels pretty solid. And I can understand how that would be difficult to tell that you might have just hit on an endangered species. In the case of the animal that was that died last month it might have even been this month off the coast of New Jersey, the individual, the captain of that boat, did make it known. That would have been an accidental death. But at least kind of the provenance of what happened will be known. And the law allows for a number of animals to be taken. Taken means either harassed or killed every year. And for the North Atlantic right whale, that means one human caused mortality a year to be able to sustain the population and ideally help the population grow. So in that case, that would be the one. And then it's incumbent upon the government of the United States to prevent any other right whales from dying. And again, as I think I explained, that process is complicated and hasn't been entirely successful, particularly in 2017, 18. Sorry, I don't know the years off the top of my head, but where 15 animals in 1 year, 3 in the United States, 12 in Canada. So that's a huge percentage of the population in 1 year to lose.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Mary. Could the whales be identified like with a chip so that ships and boats could see it on their GPS screen and it would identify the whale and the ship or smaller boat could avoid hitting it?
That's such a good idea. You know, these whales, many whales can be tracked. These whales have not taken well to being tracked. So we have been able to use a suction cup to put a tracker on them, and they'll go down to the bottom and they'll rub it off, or it'll fall off naturally in 1 to 3 days. But if we've tried to insert something to track them, they become infected. And so it's not there. The ability for us to do that right now is technology limited. My hope is that we do have the ability to identify where there's only 400 of them. How can we find them all and make people more aware that there's a right whale in your vicinity, and we can protect it. But at the moment, that technology does not exist. So we're still, that would be a great next step.
Thank you. We have a question from Charles. Are the southern and North Pacific right whales also endangered? And if so, do you know the current population?
I'd have to look it up. North Pacific right whales, there's not that many of them, but I don't know that how much is known about them either. So I can't speak to the North Pacific right whale. The southern right whale, they're doing pretty well. They're in the numbers of the tens of thousands. So their population is recovering. I don't know if they still qualify as endangered or not. We'll have to go look at a different database for that one, because I focus exclusively on North Atlantic right whales and their protection. And I only use the southern right whale because they're fat and happy and healthy and they take better pictures.
Okay, we have a couple of loaded questions from Nancy.
All right.
Assuming the fishing and shipping industry wants a healthy fishery and does not want to hurt whales, and we have the data to know when and where the whales are feeding, what do you see as the biggest hurdles? Why are the changes to protect these whales not happening sooner? And the cost, what are the costs of these industries?
Okay. This is the key question, Nancy. You represent Oceania. You know you know this. That is it's a really good question, because as I alluded and tried to be diplomatic about, was that there's a balance between the fishing industry and groups like the New England Aquarium, and our scientists who are trying to work with the fishing industry to find solutions to enable both of these things to coexist. That said, from a policy advocacy side, so now I'm going to take off my science hat entirely and just go straight for policy. The political will amongst the New England delegation is not there. We have a hard time convincing them that taking the steps necessary to protect this species, that aren't just additional research, that aren't just additional technology development, that we actually have to adhere to the law and protect these animals. That has been a struggle from a policy and advocacy standpoint. And that goes not just for fishing, but for some of the shipping as well. So that's a hurdle. The messaging from the fishing industry is spot on. They have really great messaging about the role that this industry plays in the culture of New England. The role that we're talking about real livelihoods here. People's income is tied to this industry. So those messages resonate. They've also been really good at saying, it's not us. Okay, whales are getting entangled in Canada. They're not you can't prove that they're being entangled in the United States. And that's for reasons because not everybody is required to mark their gear to show this is where the gear came from. We also, as I mentioned, don't always recover whales that die because they were entangled. So it's really hard to track the entanglement issue and attribute gear to a specific fishery where that might have happened. And the second thing, so that's the other thing is and then, you know, I showed that map where you could see the little whale tails and the high concentration in Cape Cod Bay. So Massachusetts fishery is actually subject to a closure for 4 months out of the year where there is no lobster fishery. And so that actually totally reduces risk to right whales. Maine does not have that, and they will claim that there are no right whales observed in Maine. Somebody in my position would say, we're not looking for them as aggressively as we are in Massachusetts. So that's a lot of information. I'm hoping I kind of caught most of that, but okay, I'm getting a thumbs up.
Okay. We have 2 more questions and we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
We have a question about slogans. Are there any catchy slogans around right whale conservancy? Like I got a private suggestion of "Don't go wrong, choose the right whale." Here's a slogan that the Anderson Cabot Center uses when you're talking about the right whale.
I know the name is ripe for lots of right things to happen with the right whale. I was in a workshop all day today on right whale messaging, and of course we got to beer, and I thought, has anybody done a right whale ale? Because it all rhymes, but that is a good question. I am not in marketing or communications. But the right whale to save, yes, I have seen that one. So thank you. I wanted to emphasize I don't do marketing or communications. And so sometimes this stuff gets lost on me because I'd rather talk about the Marine Mammal Protection Act for better or worse. So yes, we could use some help with some catchy things that would make people, encourage people. We're not gonna make people, we're gonna encourage people to embrace this animal and protect it.
And last question for this evening is, does the aquarium work with other organizations such as the Conservative Law Foundation on whale protection?
Yeah, the New England Aquarium is not alone. There's a whole group of organizations under the something that the New England Aquarium manages, which is the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium. So there's a whole group of organizations that participate in that, many of them scientific. And then through the work that I do, I work with NGOs across the country, including the Conservation Law Foundation, Oceana, and NRDC. There's a number of organizations who have this animal front of mind. And then I also want to say that there are aquariums in Florida, in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, skipping New Jersey, but New York, Connecticut, and New England, and then all of the zoos. And so we're actively talking about making this species a priority for the East Coast and educating our visitors about this animal and the need to save it from extinction.
Great, thank you so much.
We've got another, here we go. Tight Lines Right Whale by Tight Lines Pub Brewing Company from North Carolina.
Okay, so I'm going to say, if anybody has any slogan ideas or beer name ideas that use the right whale, that you can send them to me or Kelly.
Here, I will type my work address in here in the chat if anybody wants to reach out if you had a question that I didn't answer or that I couldn't answer. I think our scientists would be delighted to provide more information about all of the work that we've been doing on North Atlantic right whales for 40 years now.
All right, with that, we'll conclude our program. Thank you again for choosing to engage with us. Thank you all of you so much. As I mentioned at the opening, this kind of public programming is only made possible by generous contributions from community members and participants. So thank you again for your registration. If you are able to make an additional donation tonight to support our ongoing education and preservation work, the link is in the chat box. I'm typing it in right now. You can also support us by purchasing books or other fabulous gift items from our gift shop. We do have some nautical themed items there, and you can find that at our website as well. I just want to close also and say that although Old North is a historic site, we are constantly trying to connect our contemporary lives with historical topics And that's one of the reasons why a lecture like Kelly's is so exciting to us, because we want to show everybody how history is relevant and the through lines from what we're thinking about historically to today. So we're seeing, I mean, Kelly's lecture was a perfect illustration of that. So thank you, Kelly, for that. We appreciate you being here. Your work at the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at the New England Aquarium has an immeasurable impact on the blue planet and subsequently Boston, our region, and beyond. So thank you to Dr. Kelly Kryc, and thank you again to all of you. I'll be sending a follow-up email with additional resources. So check that out, and we hope to see you in another program. Good evening.
Do I need to stay on, Erin? Is there anything you need from me?
If you want to stay on for just another minute or two.
Okay.